Hi, folks. I wanted to record a video lesson for those that were unable to make it to the lesson this morning. Remember, you're expected every day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, to log on to Google Classroom and be in there ready to learn at 10 o'clock. Mondays is my day. So on Monday at 10 o'clock is when you can expect your early global lesson. Tuesday is with Miss Pointek for math. Wednesday is, your wellness day and a day for you to catch up on any work. So no class meeting at 10 o'clock on Wednesday. On Thursday, you have a class meeting at 10 o'clock with Mr. Horrigan. So make sure you log into Mr. Horrigan's class and click on his Google Meet link. And then Friday is with Dr. Brazi, again, 10 o'clock in the morning. And she should have, I think she prefers Zoom. So I'm sure there's a Zoom link on her page for that. But I digress. So those that did show up, that would be Leanna, Dante, and Jace. Thank you for being there. It was nice seeing you guys. Those that weren't able to make it, please pay attention to this video lesson. It's going to really help you out. Today is 5/11/2020, so you would find that date, and we are going to be finishing up our unit on the Age of Exploration by looking at the voyages of Zheng He, which is how you pronounce it. It looks like Zhang He, but it's pronounced Zheng He. We did look very briefly at his accomplishments when we looked at ancient China way back in the first semester. But what we're really going to be paying attention to today is, what made China such a force as far as shipping and voyages goes, and what happened, why we don't talk more about them. We talked a lot about European explorers, Columbus, for example, Vasco da Gama, but we don't talk much about the explorers in Asia. So we'll look at that as well. So what you are going to be using is a new platform that I haven't tried until today. So you're going to have to, where it's assigned into actively learn, you're going to click on that. Because it's your first time signing in, you're going to want to sign in using Google, and then just accept the permissions. It should be pretty simple. You can get it done in a couple of clicks. Okay, so I'm in student mode, so I can just show you really quickly. This reading is going to take you to, is going to take you through China's exploration of and voyages in the Indian Ocean. Last class, we looked at the Indian Ocean trade. And the way you're going to do this is you are going to answer questions along the way and read along the way. There's 3 different types of questions. One is a multiple choice question, pretty self-explanatory. Using the reading, you're going to answer the question, multiple choice question. 2 is a short answer question, which is what we have here. And again, you may use the reading, you may use some other form of media to answer the question. And 3 is a poll question. And a poll question is just, asking your opinion about something. And there is no penalty for a quote unquote incorrect answer. I'm just looking for participation on those questions. The interesting thing about this is you have to answer a question before you can move on to the next section. So make sure you answer all the questions. There's 10 of them total. Don't just answer question 1 and think, oh, I answered question 1, I don't see anything else, I'm done. Please make sure you do all the questions. Okay, so we're looking at Zheng He's voyages in the 15th century, in the 1400s. Before we do that, I want to compare the voyages of Zheng He with European explorers using the map. So if you look, you can see at the bottom of the map are 4 different ships. The really big one pictured is, you may have guessed it, the ships of China that Zheng He sailed. And this one here is the Santa Maria. That would be one of the ships that Columbus sailed. This one, the San Gabriel, Vasco da Gama sailed. Remember, he was a sailor from Portugal. And then this one here, even smaller, sailed by Jacques Cartier in France, right? That explored this northern section of Canada. So we have an idea of the ships. To me, Zheng He's ship is way more impressive than these other 3. What about their routes? Where did they travel to? Well, you can see number 2 is Vasco da Gama. Right? Remember, he went all the way up and around and out the other side of Africa. Long trip. Number 3 is Columbus's journeys. He journeyed from Europe to the New World and back again. And then number 4 is Cartier. Went from France to northern Canada, modern day northern Canada, and back again. And then you have this journey here. This is Zheng He's, and you can see all the different places he visited. He visited quite a few places. So which voyages seem more impressive to you and why? That's up to you to decide. That's your opinion. I'll show you what I wrote. I thought that Zheng He's voyages seemed more impressive. His ships were a lot more impressive and way bigger, for example. Also, he visited a lot more places. Now, here's one thing I just want to point out to you. Once you make your response, you can view your classmates' responses, which is kind of nice. You can kind of see where you stand with the rest of them, where you way off on what they said, or do you have a similar answer? Okay. If you're way off on your answer and you think, oh man, I really messed that up, you can always, where this says request sent, because I already did this, but if you didn't like your answer, you could click revise answer right here, and then it'll send me a request to allow you to fix your response, which I would gladly do. I'd unlock it. All right, so let's continue. It says the 7 voyages of Zheng He. And that is a statue of Zheng He, a sculpture of him. So it says, you might know the rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It's true. In the year 1492, Christopher Columbus led a fleet of 3 ships out into the open ocean in search of new trade routes for Europeans to follow. He ended up sailing across the Atlantic Ocean and landing off the coast of North America. This famous voyage is well known. I bet you might even be able to remember the names of the ships in Columbus's fleet. So here's your first poll question. And you can not worry because, again, ungraded, but let's poll you. See if you know the names of Columbus's fleet. And you can see some of your classmates' answer choices right here. Okay, once you answer that, move on, keep reading. So it says, well, these 3 ships might be famous, but they are minuscule or really small in comparison to the ships sailed by the famous Chinese explorer Zheng He. The smallest of Zheng He's ships, called Zhanchuan, were twice as big as Columbus's ships. These ships were meant to be small, quick, and maneuverable in ocean battle. Okay, so I'm just going to make note here that Zheng He's smallest ships were still twice the size of Columbus's. Okay, so that's the other thing you can do. You can make a note as you're going. You can highlight this and then make a note. You're welcome to share this with the class if you want. You don't have to, but you can. I'm going to share it with the class, and you hit save. Okay, so you can take notes as you go. That to me was really important, that, hey, guess what? The smallest ship that Zheng He in China sailed was still twice as big, double the size of Columbus's ships. Pretty impressive. Zheng He commanded a fleet of over 270 ships. The Zhenzhuan warships were the smallest. The other ships in his fleet were intended to carry hundreds of soldiers, their war horses, as well as thousands of pounds of treasure gathered during the voyage. Things like precious metals and exotic animals like giraffes. These other ships varied in size, but the smallest were the Bashan, or treasure ships. I'm sorry, the largest were the Bashan, or treasure ships. Historians do not all agree on how large these ships were, but some estimates suggest that these massive vessels were 3 times the size of Columbus's ships. Now, you see how this is highlighted blue? If you click on it, it's going to bring you to a piece of note here. And you can see in the note, it gives you a little visual, shows you how big this treasure ship was compared to Columbus's ship. And look how small Columbus's ship looks. Almost looks like a little canoe with a little sail on it. It looks tiny. So they had 4 decks and were roughly the size of a modern aircraft carrier. That's pretty big. Zheng He commanded an armada with no fewer than 62 of these gigantic ships. Zheng He took his impressive fleet of ships and sailed from China across the Indian Ocean and along the coast of Africa. Everywhere he went, his ships were a testament to the strength and advancement of Chinese civilization. Okay, another poll question. If Columbus sailed in 1492, do you have a guess for when Zheng He sailed? And here's what we have for our answers. Most guessed 1494. But as you can see, it says if you guessed 1403, nearly 90 years before Columbus, then you were correct. And that really shows how impressive this was. They had a much more impressive fleet of ships compared to the Europeans, and they did it a lot earlier, too. They did it 100 years earlier. Admiral Zheng He, also known as Chang Ho, was a 15th century Chinese Muslim explorer. In 1403, he was sent on a great mission by Ming Dynasty Emperor Yongle. He was to undertake 7 diplomatic missions to increase trade and arrange for tributes or gifts of money from foreign powers. Over the next 27 years, he commanded 7 voyages of huge fleets of ships that were loaded with trade goods and expensive gifts. He went as far as the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and East Africa. This type of long-distance oceanic travel was unheard of in the world. It was only because of Chinese technological advances like the magnetic compass, and we have another highlight, that Zheng He was able to complete such an audacious journey. Let's click on compass just to see what it says. And it says, without a compass, sailors can navigate by looking at the land, stars, moon, and sun. And we learned about some of the ways they did that earlier in our unit. However, clouds can make this difficult or impossible. The compass is a tool that helps you know which direction is north no matter what. So that's pretty important, right? Compass made it so that you can still know which direction you're going, even if your visibility isn't that great. Soon after Zheng He's return, the Chinese rulers decided that it was best to stay isolated from the world. They thought that too much cultural exchange could harm their local economy and tradition, so Zheng He's voyages were forgotten and even hidden within Chinese history. However, as we study them today, they are a testament to Chinese civilization in the 15th century. China had the resources to build massive ships. The Chinese ruler had the curiosity to send out and explore to far-off lands, and the Admiral Zheng He and his many troops had the courage and skill to navigate and explore farther than anyone in the history of the world. And this was all long before Europeans sought to sail out into the great unknown. So just kind of a brief this section is just kind of a brief history of how things went down, right? The Emperor Yongle, he wanted to expand his influence and China's influence. He had his buddy Zheng He command his fleet of ships. The compass, of course, as was mentioned prior to that, was an important step in this being able to happen. And then, unfortunately, what happened was once Emperor Yongle no longer was the ruler, Chinese rulers decided they wanted to isolate themselves, which throughout most of history is how China has been. They don't like necessarily trading with outsiders, and so they prefer to stay to themselves. So thinking about that, let's complete the list of events in chronological order. They did mention the magnetic compass was invented. Then something else happened. We need to figure out what that something else was mentioned. And then they said China decided to stay more isolated from the world. And based on what we read, we might remember that, Emperor Yongle, he encouraged Zheng He to command this fleet of ships and exert their influence around the world. So the correct answer would be this one here. Emperor Yongle sent Zheng He on 7 voyages around Asia and Africa with massive ships. Okay, moving on. So we're going back to Emperor Yongle. Here's what he looked like. Here's his foreign policy. Prior to the Ming Dynasty under Emperor Yongle, Chinese emperors had been cautious about dealing with foreigners. This was mainly because they were afraid of being conquered, especially by the Mongols. There was also a fear that Chinese traditions and a way of life would be challenged by foreign influences, but Emperor Yongle wanted to show how powerful he was internationally. So Emperor Yongle, he has an inclination to show people, hey, China's powerful and I'm its powerful ruler. So what is he going to do? He's going to send off Zheng He to go around to these different areas in Asia and ask for gifts. So traditionally known as tributes. Traditionally, smaller states in Southeast Asia offered tribute or gifts to Chinese emperors to prevent China from invading them or to get to get protection from other invaders. However, the system of tribute had stopped under previous emperors, and Yongle wanted to bring it back. Yongle saw the tribute as a way of showing that China was superior to the other empires. Having foreign ambassadors come to his place to bow before him and give him gifts would show everyone how great and powerful he was. So he called upon his greatest general, Zheng He. So I'm going to just highlight this part because I think it's pretty important. The reason he's doing all this is because he wanted to show how powerful China was and to get taxes, also known as tributes. Share that with the class. The other thing I forgot to point out,
having foreign ambassadors come to his place
the
to
other
bow
thing I
before
forgot
him
to
and
point
give him
out
gifts
is,
would show
this thing
everyone
will
how great
actually
and
read to
powerful
you
he
too if
was.
you're getting tired of listening to me. So let's try it out.
Having foreign ambassadors come to his place to bow before him and give him gifts would show everyone how great and powerful he was.
Okay, so kind of different, kind of cool. All right, so let's see if we can't answer this question. And this is a short answer question. So it says, why was reestablishing tribute to China important to understanding how China's foreign policy changed over time? Well, we could see, and you can see my response here to show the world how powerful China was. Here's your other classmates' responses. Okay. Admiral Zheng He. Here's a likeness of him, what he most likely looked like. It says Emperor Yongle chose Admiral Zheng He as the man to carry out his most important foreign trips. Zheng He was born in a Muslim peasant family. When he was 10, he was captured by Ming Dynasty forces and castrated. If you don't know what castrated means, it means that they chopped off his manhood. He was forced into the army of the future Emperor Yongle. He became Yongle's head eunuch. Eunuchs were often trusted advisors, military leaders, and leaders in the court. And again, this is highlighted, so you can click on it, and it'll tell you a little bit more about what a eunuch is. And it's essentially somebody who has been castrated. Okay, India and Sri Lanka. By 1405, Zheng He was an admiral in his imperial fleet. He helped Emperor Yongle rise to power by overthrowing the previous ruler. Yongle then chose him to lead a fleet of ships across the Indian Ocean in search of new states to pay tribute and come under Chinese control.
The large ships
62 of the ships were the massive treasure ships called
bamboo rods plated like mats.
They were the
A
largest
ship carries
ships
a
ever
complement of
constructed at the
1,000
time.
men.
A
The
Muslim
vessel has 4
traveler
decks and
described them.
contains rooms,
And here's
cabins,
the
and
quote.
saloons for merchants.
Let's have our helper read it.
The large ships have anything from 12 down to 3 sails made of bamboo rods plated like mats. A ship carries a complement of 1,000 men. The vessel has 4 decks and contains rooms, cabins, and saloons for merchants.
Okay, so almost sounds like a city with a sail, right? I mean, they even have saloons in there, which are basically bars. Lots of different rooms, 4 decks, thousands of men. Moving on, it says the ships were packed with freshwater food supplies and Chinese luxury goods. These were intended to impress foreign rulers. The hope was that the foreign rulers would send their own riches back to China in tribute. It is believed that Zheng He had between 20 and 30,000 men in his great fleet. There were also cannons, bombs, and rockets to allow for defense. So, lots of impressive things. What is the most impressive in your opinion? Well, you can see what I wrote. Um, Perhaps you can see what your other classmates wrote as well. 30,000 men for sure. They had a lot of food supplies, bomb and rockets for defense. All great answers. Here's a more zoomed in map of the locations that Zheng He visited. And you can see he visited East Africa. Okay, he visited the Arabian Peninsula, which was where the Muslim Empire was. He visited India, visited these Spice Islands here. So he visited quite a few places. Okay, that's the map. And now the reading is just going to go through some of the voyages. And there were 7 in total. The first 3 voyages of Zheng He, 1404, 1408, and 1409, followed the established trade routes. They headed down the coast of Vietnam with stops at Sumatra and Java. They then crossed the eastern Indian Ocean to reach India and Sri Lanka. At every place he landed, Zheng He presented messages of goodwill and gifts to the local rulers. The ruler was then invited to visit the court of Emperor Yongle. So you got to imagine this is like almost like a public relations trip, right? You have Zheng He going to all these different places, and these huge ships with thousands upon thousands of men show up. Think about how impressive that would be, almost intimidating, right? Zheng He gets off of his ship and he goes to the leader of, the local leader and says, "Here are gifts from Emperor Yongle." And it was all meant to try and make their neighbors be almost fearful but respectful of the power of China. Okay. These and other actions only strengthen the view that China was the chief power in the region and its greatest source of stability. So, what was the purpose of Zheng He's voyages? And you can see that they're multiple choice. And really, it was to show the world China's power and to collect goods and tributes from other lands. Okay, moving on. And I don't know if you've noticed in the right-hand corner here, the percentage. That'll tell you how much you've completed. So we're a majority of the way through. We're almost done. We're about 80% through. Persian Gulf and Africa. On the 4th voyage in 1413, Zheng He sailed to India again. He went to Cochin and Calicut on the west coast. He stopped off
With
at
the
the
body of a
Maldives
deer and the
Islands,
tail of
crossed
an
the Arabian
ox,
Sea,
and a
and
fleshy
reached
boneless
Hormuz on the
horn,
Persian
with
Gulf.
luminous spots
The
like a
report
red
stated
cloud
that
or a
19
purple
foreign
mist.
rulers
Its hoofs do
sent
not tread on living
tributes and
beings, and in its wandering, it
diplomatic
carefully
missions
selects
to
its
the
ground.
emperors as a
It walks
result
in
of the 4th
stately fashion,
voyage.
and in its motion it observes a
Okay,
rhythm.
here's
Its
a poll
harmonious
question,
voice sounds
and
like
it's
a
a
bellow
description
musical
of an
tube.
animal.
Don't worry. This is an ungraded poll
I will
question.
read it to you. Actually, we'll have her read it to you.
With the body of a deer and the tail of an ox, and a fleshy boneless horn, with luminous spots like a red cloud or a purple mist. Its hoofs do not tread on living beings, and in its wandering, it carefully selects its ground. It walks in stately fashion, and in its motion it observes a rhythm. Its harmonious voice sounds like a bell or musical tube.
Okay.
Don't worry. This is an ungraded poll question.
Thank you, Joanna. So, as she just read, that's a description of one of many animals that was considered exotic and unknown to people in China that was brought back. This particular animal is from Africa. And when it was brought back, people had no idea what they were even seeing. So I want you to just take an educated guess. Which of these four animals do you think it might be? And you can see we're pretty much split down the middle between zebra and elephant. But think about it. What has the tail of an ox and a fleshy, boneless horn, and has spots? Zebras have stripes, not spots. So, interesting. All right, and you're going to find out right now what it was. It was a giraffe. All right, so the final three voyages went even further, reaching all the way to Mogadishu, Malindi, Mombasa, and Zanzibar, all on the coast of East Africa. The ruler of Mogadishu sent a delegation to China to meet Yongle. Zheng brought back exotic animals like lions, leopards, camels, ostriches, rhinos, zebras, and giraffes from Africa. He also brought back gems, spices, medicines, and fine cotton cloth, as well as knowledge of strange foreign peoples and customs. Unfortunately, as you can see, Zheng died in the middle of his seventh voyage in 1433, and his body was returned to China for burial. After the 7 voyages, the Chinese closed the door to the outside world. And you can see this in the first minute of this video. You don't have to watch all 5 minutes, just the first minute. But essentially, China's fleet of ships are destroyed once a new emperor takes over. And we read about this a little earlier in the reading, but China wanted to head back to isolation. In the narrator's opinion in the video, as well as a lot of historians' opinions, if that hadn't happened, China could have been, really the big world leader. They were 100 years ahead of Europe. And they might have been the ones that were exploring all the, different new world places that we had, spoken about. All right. So they returned to a policy of foreign isolation. The new emperor, Zhuang, whose rule began in 1426, banned the building of ocean-going ships. It may have been the threat from the Mongols that caused the emperor to return to isolationism. Zhuang and emperors after him turned inward and focused on perfecting the Great Wall of China to protect them from foreign threats. Giant ocean-faring ships were expensive and distracting from the important work that needed to be done closer to home. So, this only lasted about 30 years, but China was a world superpower on the open seas. But unfortunately, once the new emperor took over, all of that changed. The entire fleet of ships was burned to the ground on purpose. And China really focused on themselves and defending themselves from outside invaders. So that brings us to our 10th and final question. What do you think this shows us about the Chinese civilization in the 15th century? And again, you can see my response as well as some of your classmates' responses. But you can see Andrew said, hey, that, they started focusing on the Great Wall of China. Dante said this, but Dante, this is inappropriate. That China was all powerful and they had some expensive, we'll say goods, because that's a much more academic way of saying it. Okay. And that is your lesson for the week. Please make sure you finish this up. I'm available if you have any questions at all. And I just want to point out one other thing before I go. I think I mentioned this last Monday, but I'm going to keep mentioning this until somebody signs up for one of these things. Every Wednesday, as you may know, is a Wellness Wednesday. I think there's a lesson that the counseling department does, and then the rest of the day is really meant for you to catch up on any work that or assignments you haven't gotten to. So on Wednesdays, what I offer is the ability for you to sign up for an office hour with me, which essentially means that there are 30 minutes of time slotted available to any student who wants to meet with me. And, so you can use that time. So you can see there's morning session time slots. It'll be 10 to 10:30, 10:30 to 11, 11 to 11:30, and then 11:30 to 12, which was taken out. And then there's afternoon session slots as well. There's, again, this is from last week, so some